I'm sure most of you know, in 1835, some
It's
guy by the
okay
name of
now.
Charles was it Darwin, spent some time in the Galapagos, and it changed his life. It changed biology, and it changed science. It was probably one of the most important coincidences or events in the history of science in the last 200 years. And it's led to all kinds of change. Certainly has affected religion, politics, and philosophy ever since, and probably will never stop doing so. And he had a few things to say about the Galapagos. One thing he said was, the natural history of this archipelago is very remarkable. It seems to be a little world within itself. Another thing he said, seeing the seeing the gradation and diversity of structure in one small, intimately related group of birds, one might really fancy that from an original paucity of birds in this archipelago, one species has been taken and modified for different ends. And of course, he's talking about the house finch family, which is found in a number of varieties on the islands. And here to take us on the trip is Paul Evans.
Thanks, Avery. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming on a kind of a rainy, dreary evening. I'm delighted to be here, and we are lucky enough to have our Zoom process going on, and there are people sharing our Birders Night tonight from 9 different states and from Canada. So Salem Audubon Society is now international. So I'm delighted. Rick in Calgary, hello. Just to let him know, Rick and a number of other people are birdwalk leaders when Roxanne they go down to when we migrate in November down to Southern California. We actually lead bird walks at Big Morongo Canyon Preserve, which is a little bit north of Springs. So if you ever get down in that area, that is probably the premier birding destination. As he's shaking that she's been there. So anyways, we are talking about a spectacular trip that Roxy, my wife Roxy and I made in March of 2023. We were cooped up for a long time from COVID, and we were raring to go. So once the international travel situation kind of stabilized, we decided we were going to get back on our travel schedule. And so we both had never been to South America. So we decided we were going to combine 2 trips. And last month we presented our trip to the Upper Roxanne in Peru. And this month we're going to present our trip to the Galapagos. So I'll get started and we'll share some wonderful thoughts with you together. So this is what we're going to do. We'll give a brief introduction of the Galapagos themselves. What are they? Their islands? Where are they? How do they fit into the geographic picture? We're going to talk a little bit about the natural forces that provide diverse habitats, which means that you're going to have a whole bunch of different animals, plants, and birds in that area. We will talk a little bit more about Darwin, who actually, as a trained biologist myself, he's one of my heroes. And we'll present some of the details of our expedition travel, because I know some people in the back of their minds are saying, geez, I'll go to Galapagos someday. So we'll kind of share with you how we approach that. We'll have some photographs. Roxy's our photographer in our family of birds, animals, and plants that we discovered while we were there. We were there for about a week. And then we'll discuss some strategies that are in place now for preserving this fragile treasure. And it is fragile and it's endangered. So there are things that we encountered that we understand now why they're there, but the people of Ecuador want to keep this treasure and preserve it for generations to come. Okay, so international birding is not for the faint of heart. And you have to do a lot of airplane seat time in order to get where you want to go. So this is our trip. We started at PDX. We flew to Atlanta. From there, we flew to Quito in Ecuador. Then we flew down to a coastal city called Guayaquil, which we both had never heard of. It's actually 3 million people. It's one of their Ecuador's biggest port cities. And we overnighted there, and then we flew a smaller airplane to Baltra, which is the island with the single commercial airport for the Galapagos. And when we got there and went through customs and got our luggage and everything, we went on board a ship. And we lived on board a ship for a week that we were there. So this is what the geography looks like. And if you look on the right-hand map of South America, you'll see that the equator kind of goes right in the middle of Ecuador. And if you just hang a left about 600 miles, that's where the Galapagos Islands are. The left-hand map actually shows some of the major islands. Actually, there's a lot of islands in the Galapagos. It's a volcanic chain. And all the islands, if you take a look at that map, you'll see that there's different colors on each of the islands. So I'll have you focus on the island on the left that looks like somewhat like a seahorse, and the equator goes right through its head. That's an island which shows kind of multiple mountainous, hilly type areas. The green represents higher elevations, and that in fact are old burnout volcanoes, and the islands themselves are still active. So this is kind of what this area looked like. Lots of different islands. So why is this so important? I mean, these volcanic islands in the middle of the ocean, who cares? Well, there's an incredible process that is going on off of South America that leads to the splendor of wildlife and plant life and animals, etc., in the Galapagos. And it has to do with the ocean currents. And the ocean currents are involved with pulling nutrients from the bottom of the floor of the ocean up to more shallow waters and distributing it along the way that the currents are moving. And so if you take a look at this map on the coast of South America, there is a Humboldt current, which is the Peru coastal current, and that is moving north from Arctic areas all the way to the tropics, and it's cold and it's deep, and it causes a lot of upwelling, and that's where you get all the nutrients feeding up into the more shallow areas of ocean water. Lots and lots of nutrient content. So plankton and krill and all of those small little critters that form the basis of the food chain in that area for fish, for animals, whales, all that kind of stuff. That starts in that area. Additionally, there's what's called the Cromwell current, which is it's equatorial, and it goes from west to east. And if you look at that little map, you'll notice that a red area kind of moves to the right and goes right into the Galapagos Island, and then it bisects one part north and one part south, and swirls all of the water in that area. And that area, the Cromwell current is warm and shallow, so it's causes divergence and upwelling, again, more nutrients into the water. This current is 100 miles wide and it's 100 meters deep. So it's not that wide and it's not that deep, but it's persistent and it moves across and it churns things up. And then we have the Panama flow, a current that goes from the north coming to the southwest that also drives the ocean waters away from the coast and into the Galapagos are. So lots and lots of ocean things that are continuously happening in there that leads to turning up the water and getting nutrients for the flora and fauna. We overnighted at this coastal city called Guayaquil, and of course we're ready to go to get on the boat and do all these things. So we're sitting in the hotel and we're just birding outside of the hotel. And there were just amazing birds even right outside of the hotel because we're in Ecuador. And so we ran across this pale-legged hornero, which is a bird that I had never seen before. And he was just kind of walking around on the sidewalk. Beautiful bird, a kind of a thrush-like bird. It's very surprising because I hadn't seen this bird in what I was studying to get ready for the trip. And we came across an Ecuador thrush, and we actually found a nest of this bird. The nest had three babies. Their heads were sticking up, and mom was trying to feed them. And we're literally right off the sidewalk in the hotel. So beautiful looking bird. We also saw a black-cheeked woodpecker, and this was we saw loads of different woodpeckers in Central and South America, and it's just reignited my interest in woodpeckers. But this is a bird that is in Central and South America. We actually saw this guy in Costa Rica. But as you can see, he's got a very, very black patch behind his eye. He's got a red area on the back of his head, which is consistent with being a male in this species. He's got almost a ladder back-like back. If you look at the stripes with some spots on the bottom. And these were relatively common in that area. Okay, so finally we get on our 737 and we go to Baltra. And Baltra is actually a small island in called South Seymour Island. There is a North Seymour and a South Seymour. And that's where all of the flights come in, and since there are no real roads in between all these islands, if you're going to go to Galapagos, usually you have some form of boat that you're going to get on, whether it's a ship, whether it's a catamaran, all different types of conveyances. And so sure enough, our ship was in the harbor right outside of Baltra. So we cleared customs. We were taken on a kind of a van, and we moved over to the marine area and got on our little Zodiacs to go into our boat. We took a National Geographic tour. The reason why we did that is not only do they have spectacular expeditions, but this particular trip that we had, Roxy was very interested in improving her photography skills even to the next level. And they have National Geographic instructors. So those people that produce those fabulous pictures in National Geographic magazine and all of their publications or whatever are actually with us on the tour, helping us to do things with our cameras and talk about composition and processing and all of those things that modern photography has. So that was spectacular for us, and I'll mention a few things down the road with that process. But the other reason why this particular tour was there, because we had a chance to mix this tour with the tour that we took in the Upper Amazon in Peru, also a National Geographic expedition, and also with a National Geographic instructor. So when we finished, we really learned a lot and improved our photography skills, and you'll see some of these things here. The numbers on this slide represent the days that we were there. So if you take a look in the middle central area, #1. We actually landed on Malta. We took a little expedition locally, and then we moved on to 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then flew back to Guayaquil to go uh, and move on. And so I'll go over each of these areas and show you what we saw in each of these areas. Harry wanted to talk about Charles Darwin, and I'll kind of fill in what he's talked a little bit about. He is the father of modern evolutionary theory. He was an English naturalist, geologist, and biologist. Back then, they didn't have very, very rigorous academic institutions with advanced degrees in all of the areas that we have today. So he was actually a geologist that started along and then moved, was also a naturalist and biologist kind of on the side. He visited the Galapagos Islands in 1835, and he was on a ship called the HMS Beagle, who was actually on a naturalist 2-year-long cruise going various areas around the world, collecting specimens and scientific materials to go back to England for further study later on. But he observed in looking at these islands, and the captain and the crew, these are volcanic islands that were very deserty, and, it's hard to find water, and all the animals were weird, and everyone was saying, "Come on, Darwin, let's go. We don't want to be here this long." But no, he made him wait, and he collected all of his things that he studied later on and wrote journals and died. By the way, how do you study birds in 1835? Yeah, you shoot them. So you have to be a good hunter in order to be an ornithologist in 1835. So, and you have to be a taxidermist, because once you shoot them, you have to clean them up and get them ready, but you have to preserve structures and so forth so that you can get them in a lab. And for those of you that don't understand this process, it's fascinating. I had a chance to go to the Smithsonian and look at some of their bird specimens, and they are one of the world's largest. And they have rooms and rooms and rooms bigger than this room. And they have cabinets that are only about this deep. And there's just bird after bird after bird, all variations and so forth, all cataloged and weighted, measured, and so forth. And if you're ever in the mood to write a field guide for birds, some of the very academic oriented people, they actually make appointments and go and study for days and days at the Smithsonian to figure out, well, what are the variations of the Swainson's thrushes that are in various areas. So that's what he kind of was doing. He formulated this theory on the basis of beak morphologies on finches and also on mockingbirds, and they're different islands, even though the islands are very, very close. So he published his book on the origin of the species and on the origin of species in 1859. A lot of people don't know he was actually more famous in his career for his work on barnacles and marine invertebrates. And still some of his work is studied today by marine biologists. He's got a number of barnacle species named after him. One thing that I found in my research for this talk is his father was actually, his father-in-law was Wedgwood, who is the same person that had China that we all know from England. And so he was the one that kind of was a sponsor for, he was the person that sponsored the Beagle trip by funding it. So I thought that was interesting. But back in those days, you weren't considered highly educated unless you were a member of one of three professions. One, you're either a physician or you're a lawyer, or you're a man of the cloth. And so his father put him into seminary and he hated it. So then he put him into medical school and he hated that. And so finally he got into this naturalism and geology and so forth. And that's kind of how he wound up where he was. So I thought that was interesting. All right. So what about the Galapagos? Tell me some facts that are interesting. Well, it's a young area geologically, lots of volcanic islands. There are 19 larger ones, and I think there's a total of over 30 islands. Most of them are still uninhabited. As I said, it's 1,000 kilometers or 600 miles to the west of the country of Ecuador. Originally, it was discovered in 1535, sparsely inhabited actually until the 1960s. Now it's 97% uninhabited because it's a national park and it's controlled. So you can't buy property there. You can't do anything other than these little areas around the little colonies where the workers and the naturalists and all these people live. Yes, sir.
I think that there was
Yeah, none. In fact, none until around 1960s because there's not enough water, there's not enough food. You're 600 miles from the nearest, city and so forth. And so you had sailors that came and went, pirates were there up and down for a while, but that's about it. So nobody, everyone said, hey, there's no sense in going to this place because it's just too remote and too barren. But now they also have a Galapagos Marine Preserve, and this reserve is one of the world's largest now, so it covers a huge area around the islands. But it's still active volcanically. They had an eruption in 2018, so that's not that far from where we are now. Can they have another one? Yes. So the geologists are all studying that and looking to see what they can figure out on that. It's very highly regulated, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but they want to make sure that they maintain the fishing population, the water quality. They want to prevent invasives, and they don't want damage from overcrowding or too many tourists. So the Marine Reserve actually is 51,000 square miles. So that is about as big as the state of Alabama. So it's pretty big. And very diverse in wildlife and plant life that's there. There's been 2,900 marine species that have been identified in the Galapagos, which is a lot. But it's in the World Heritage Site danger list. So they put in some of these restrictions that I'm going to talk a little bit about. And the things that are threatening it now are growing tourism and pollution, damage from just a lot of people using a lot of different things. Invasive species are always a danger with boats and things coming in and the tourists coming in. A lot of illegal fishing. It's just tremendous number of fish, but there were a lot of commercial fishing fleets that were depleting the ocean, the fish and the crustaceans and so forth. So that was a problem. And then they actually started to have some undocumented immigrants. Even the Galapagos has that problem. So they're very strict about that kind of stuff. Okay, so what does that translate to when you actually visit the Galapagos? Well, all visits, you can only land on any of these islands with a certified Galapagos naturalist accompanying you. If you don't have one of those, you are not allowed to land on the islands because they protect the animals when tourists come on the island.
You cannot feed the animals. You must stay 6 feet away, 2 meters. No flashes are allowed on your cameras, no smoking, no fires. You can only fish if you have a government issued permit to fish, and there's limits. You cannot introduce any food animals or plants to the environment, and you actually have reserved times. So we would have a schedule, which I put on here on the left of the slide, the wildlife sightings, that says these are the days, these are the places that we're going to go these days. And they actually have, okay, you can be at this place from 6 in the morning until 10 in the morning. Then you have to leave. And then somebody else comes in and takes that spot. Okay, so I mean, it was very, very controlled. The one thing I found out too that wasn't in any of the books and stuff I read, you know, I'm a birder, so I see a bird and the bird jumps in the bush, and I want to fish. You know, we all do that. I got a frowny face and a finger from the naturalist. No, we're not allowed to do that, and no tapes either. You can't, you know, try to call in birds. No, we're not allowed to do that. So I was appropriately chagrined. Okay, so this is the boat that we were on. This is the National Geographic Islander 2. It had a total of 68. How many? 48. Okay, 48 rooms on it. And so everyone was kind of using zodiacs, which are inflatable boats with a rigid floor on it. And each zodiac would have a naturalist and a pilot. And a lot of times we would go into what we called wet landings, which means we would go right up to the shore and you'd have to wade in through the water onto the beach. Or we had dry landings where some places they had little kind of marina boardwalks and little docks and stuff that we could get up on. So that's kind of the way it looked. The naturalists most of them were actually born and bred in the Galapagos. So they really knew their stuff. And they were really great to talk with. Had lots and lots of history and stories. It was really fun to do that. So day one, we went to some mangrove areas, some swamp areas, and these were the areas where the green sea turtles were developing and growing up and so forth. They were relatively sheltered, and there's small little fish that they could eat that kind of also hung out in that area in the roots of the mangrove. And we saw these little heads of the green sea turtles coming up and down as they were exploring us as we were exploring them. The animals here were not afraid of anybody, and they were, you know, it was very curious about what we were doing. We did see some small sharks that were also using this area as a kind of a safe haven for the smaller, younger sharks. This is a Galapagos shark. It's sort of a relative of the black-tipped reef shark, and they were all around there. So we did that, and then what we would do is we would go to various areas, a morning trip, an afternoon trip, and then we would have dinner, and the ship would sail in the night to go to the next place and then anchor off where we're going to go, because we usually started very early. So this is a picture of our ship moving to one of the next stops along our trip. But everything was very variable, and we had, I mean, these are cactus. And we had all kinds of iguanas and finches and all these things that were related to eating cactus and working with cactus. And what we saw was the lowlands were very dry with a lot of cactus and grasses and so forth. And as you got higher in elevation, the plant life changed, the animals changed. So you had to make sure that you knew where you were going and what your targets were. And it's a lot of times based on water. And lowlands mostly were dry and up in the mountains. We didn't get much up in the high areas of the mountains because it took too long to get there. But the higher areas had different species, and that includes some of the birds too. We did get a chance to go to a giant tortoise preserve, and these guys are huge. I mean, they're bigger than this lectern here. Some of them weighed 300 pounds, some of them are over 200 years old. And believe it or not, Galapagos giant tortoises migrate, which we didn't know, but they had studied them by using like Modus radio trackers. They just put it on the top of the shell and you can see it going, and they go based up and down on elevation, and they go north and south looking for different types of food at different areas. And then depending on where they're laying their eggs and mating and doing all that stuff. So we were at this preserve, and we stopped for lunch, and there was this like kind of a pavilion area with a roof and some wooden picnic tables. And I turned around to Roxy and said, "Roxy, look over there on the railing of this. There's this bird that's hopping over there." And so Roxy obviously takes out a camera, and this bird that's going up was a Galapagos flycatcher, and it was literally hopping and eating a bug and hopping and eating a bug and hopping. And so she got a picture of this this Galapagos flycatcher in mid-hop, and if you look carefully, the bugs are in there. And so, wait a minute, you've got bugs, but you're not eating them. And so we looked around, and sure enough, in the far corner, there was a wooden post that had a kind of a cavity in it. And believe it or not, it was a nest. And so the bird was coming, collecting insects or whatever, and then waiting for all the people eating their lunch to move away from the table that was closest to the nest. And then they would come in and feed the pigs. So, I mean, that was fun. These guys were on all the islands that we visited. And they also had subspecies too. So this is also a Galapagos flycatcher, but if you'll notice, he's a little more gray. And it's one of the subspecies of Galapagos flycatcher. Okay, I want to introduce you a little bit to one of the reasons why I wanted to go to the Galapagos. And based on my personal history, I used to breed finches when I was younger. And I was very, very interested in the Australian finches. And these are very colorful birds. I was actually, Kathy was talking to me about how I got interested in birds. And this is one of the ways I did. I actually was in the 5th grade, and one of our student teachers came in and brought a cage of his finch collection to show the students, and I just became fascinated with that. But these birds are mostly sub-Saharan Africa or Australia or South Asia, and I've been privileged enough to not only breed them and work with them, but also see them in the wild. It's great fun for me. I collected finches for a number of years, and one of the reasons why I did was you probably know this, I'm a retired physician. And I was working a lot of hours. I was, but I was also in an education program. Lots of hours, and I had no time to go traveling. So if I couldn't go out and see birds, I thought, okay, I'll bring some birds that I like. So I made aviaries. Because birds they're kind of messy. You have to keep up and do all these things, and sometimes I like doing my chores with the birds. Well, finally, I had to give those up. So, but we would move every stop on a tour in the Army. I would have to load up all my finches in cages, put them inside the car, and driving to all these places. And so there's
all the trips that we took, and they were not small trips. We went from Virginia, I was in Bethesda, Maryland, DC area. We moved to Oklahoma, then we moved to Washington State to Tacoma. And again, then we moved there to Tulsa, Oklahoma, then we moved to Indianapolis, and finally, said, no, we're not going to do that. Okay, it took me a long time, but I still have an interest in places. So I got to study finch genetics and learn about husbandry. How do you keep birds? What are the diseases they have? And I actually was my own vet, because everywhere I went, I would find a veterinarian and nobody knew how to take care of finches. Number one, they were very small, and number two, to get a blood sample from the finch, it's not an easy thing, especially when they don't like it. So you have to learn, I went with Harry to the bird banding area down at Luke, and brought back all those things where you have to grab the bird specially, otherwise they'll get after you and so forth. So anyways, that was fun, but it got me really interested in all of the various genetics. And you can see from this picture of this book that I have, on the top left is a lady Gouldian finch from northern Australia. There's a fire finch from sub-Saharan Africa. There's some red ears. There's a lavender finch down in the middle. There's a blue cap from South Africa. There's a red-headed parrot finch from Australia. And the one on the right is actually a genetic variation of a lady Gouldian finch. So I've had most of all those. So that was fun. But then I started studying to get ready for the Galapagos trip. And I learned a couple of things about this evolutionary process, and I want to share that with you a little bit. We talk about survival of the fittest and natural selection and so forth. Well, evolution theory has actually evolved in and of itself. And so now one of the concepts that's being explored and proven by research is a concept called adaptive radiation. And this has been applied to finches on the Galapagos. And if you look at my diagram here, we started with kind of a central bird similar to a house finch that is postulated from South America, that somehow was blown over to the Galapagos or was on a ship or some way to get there. And then that bird was transformed to different islands, and it had changes related to what was needed for its feeding. And so if you look on the bottom left, if you're a fruit eater, that comes in today to the vegetarian tree finch. If you're an insect eater, you are a tree finch, either large or medium or small. Or if you have probing beaks, you can either be a woodpecker finch or a warbler finch, and there's two types of those. There's green and gray. Or you can be a cactus eater, and there is, believe it or not, a cactus finch. We saw that. The purple stars are the ones that we saw. If you're a seed eater, you can be a small ground finch, a medium ground finch, or if you really like big seeds, heavy seeds, you can be a large ground finch. And there's kind of this orphan bird that they've just, within the past few decades, has classified called a vampire finch. And the study of this bird is amazing because this is a bird that predominantly feeds on blood. What? So where does this bird get blood? And the answer is it goes and feeds at night, and it pecks on the neck of other birds or on the nestlings.
where it comes and pecks on the nestlings to get the blood. And it's a real problem. Some of the ornithologists have indicated that this bird can be a real pest to up to 30 to 50% of all hatched birds were killed because of the vampire finches that came and slowly depleted their blood. Wow. So that was something new that I learned. Okay, now evolution has been updated for this new theory, and evolutionary ecology is actually a formal course that's taught in most biology curriculums around the country. In fact, one of my best friends teaches that at Marion University, where I used to work. But what they found is instead of having individual isolated changes genetically that led to these new species, they think now it has to do with competitive interaction, which encourages new species. And there's a Canadian researcher called Dul Schluter at the University of British Columbia, wrote a book called The Ecology of Adaptive Radiation, which says that this arises not from isolated birds, but from existing populations. And they're not just from chance mutations and isolation. So there's actually a competitive process that goes on with multiple populations. He studied the Galapagos finches to get this started, and now he's actually studying stickleback fish. He dredged a whole bunch of ponds in his university area and then had different populations of sticklebacks and watched them change and mutate and so forth. And he's been doing that for 20, 30 years. So he's actually found new species that have occurred because of that. Other examples of this evolutionary theory changes include work with honey creepers, silver swords, which is plant white, and cichlids, which are fish in Africa. Okay, so that's the background. So let's go look at some birds and families. Believe it or not, after all these colorful finches that I showed you on that book, this is the first finch I saw in Galapagos. And it looks like a tired house finch, doesn't it? I mean, it's like, you're all jazzed up about this. But saw this is a small tree finch. We actually saw that was the female. This is the male. So he's got some black on his area and low areas of their insect ears. We saw ground finches, and these are male and female ground finches, and this was on the beach at Islands. Here's the male. But notice the beaks, so here's the size of the beak. What bird do we know that has that size beak?
Grosbeak.
Yeah, maybe a grosbeak. It's a little smaller than a grosbeak, but maybe goldfinch, house finch, those kinds of finches that most of us know pretty much, right? There's the female, same type of thing. This is a medium ground finch. So notice the beak on this finch. It's a female. So you got a little more horsepower on that beak, don't you? So they can crack bigger seeds. They can get into areas that require more power from that beak to open up nuts and different things that they're going to be eating. This is the male. So it depends on what you're seeing them eat as it relates to their physiology. And the ones that are most successful are the ones that can take the foodstuffs that are limited in each one of these islands and maximize their ability to eat it. And that's kind of how the whole process went. Now, believe it or not, mockingbirds are also the same way in Galapagos. So there's like 4 different species of mockingbirds, and 3 of them are different, are just on their own island, and then the 4th one is actually kind of universal, the Galapagos mockingbird. I'll show you that. Okay,
We also looked obviously at animals and plants as well as birds. And we also did some snorkeling and looked at some marine animals and so forth. But this one was incredible because this is a marine iguana and he looks like a little black dragon, doesn't he? I mean, this would be something that I could put on my porch for Halloween and scare the kids. Amazing. And they call them little dragons. But they're black, and the reason why they're black is because these are lizards that dive in the sea. And what do they eat? Well, they eat algae. And a lot of the algae is very deep. So some of these lizards go down and can go as low as 100 feet to find algae. And they can hold their breath for up to an hour, although most of them usually only hold their breath about 15 or 20 minutes. It's the only marine lizard in the world. They are black because when they get out of the water, they're cold. And so they scurry up onto the lava of the rocks that are also black, and they bake in the sun. And they even, if you take a look at this picture, you can see there's not one marine iguana there, but there's actually three. They literally stack themselves like, poker chips because they're all huddled to get warm because they're cold-blooded. And then they'll warm up enough and then they go back in and go get their algae meal for their next meal. The interesting thing is they have little salt glands on their head, and because they take in salt water and they don't want to overuse the salt in their body system, they actually kind of expel the salt, and it looks like they're sneezing, and they sneeze and have this spray of concentrated salt that gets out and maintains the balance in their blood system. The interesting thing that I found doing my research, and we're all now looking at climate change, and one of the things that's really important in this area in the world is El Nino and La Nina. Has anyone ever heard of that? Yeah. Well, we're in for a big El Nino coming this year. And we all know that in Oregon because it's going to affect our weather here. But down there, it affects tremendously the food source of marine iguanas. And if you have El Nino, they have warm water, which depletes red and green algae. And then there's an overgrowth of what's called brown algae. And that is very poor nutritiously for these marine iguanas because their whole biome inside their intestinal tract is geared up enzymatically to eat green and red algae. So when these El Ninos happen, you get all this incredible amount of mortality in marine iguanas, and they lose lots and lots of weight. The body actually has been research demonstrated to shrink up to 20%, and El Ninos have high starvation risks. So I'm a little bit worried about the marine iguanas in the Galapagos with this upcoming El Nino. We had Galapagos land iguanas also, and they were not eating algae. They ate all kinds of different things. Sounds like I have competition. But they're just beautiful, beautiful lizards. They were pretty common. Oh, excuse me. We did have birds from other places, and all the birds on the Galapagos were not endemics. This is an American flamingo. And we found a flock of about 20 of them in this kind of elevated pond area. And the pond was very shallow, and it had brine shrimp in it. And they were, this is like the best food for flamingos. They love it. So they were in there eating brine shrimp. And we were in the springtime, so we saw them in their peak breeding color. And this is a beautiful picture that Roxy got of an American flamingo. These are not just in Galapagos, they're in the Caribbean, and actually they move all the way up to southern Florida. But they were doing what birds do in the spring, and Roxy got this picture, and I looked at it and I said, well, what are they doing? And she said, well, you know, those two birds that are over on the side, one of them said, well, you know, Agnes, maybe they ought to get a room. So, you know, you never know what you're going to see if you're a photographer. So this is a Galapagos mockingbird, and these birds were very common. They were probably like as common as our scrub jays. Very curious birds. And we would go and take pictures and stuff. We were on the beach one time, and we were kind of getting down close to the surface of the sand so that we could take pictures of some of the birds that were shorebirds that were on the sand. And one of these birds came right up near Roxy and wanted to go into the lens and pick the reflection of his face on her lens. So when they were constantly looking around, and it's amazing. This is a great frigate bird, and these are seabirds that spend a lot of time kind of soaring up in the air, and these are pirates. They would wait for other birds to catch fish, and then they would stalk the birds and grab the fish out of their talons. So a lot of the rest of the birds, I'm sure, don't like to see these guys. But in the breeding season, the males have these big red pouches, and they kind of blow them up as a kind of as an attractant for females to say, hey, look at me, I'm healthy and whatever. Yes, sir.
Is that a nest?
Yes, they nested on these sticks, but are they worried about people or anything? No, as a fact. I mean, I was standing right next to that bird when Roxy took that picture. So the animals and birds there, they could care less whether you're there or not, because nobody is hunting them or doing these bad things. So it was great for if you're a photographer, because you could really get some close in pictures. These are brown knotty terns. There were a lot of them. This is a Nazca booby. This is the biggest booby in the Galapagos Islands, and they're very kind of loquacious. And they were very solid, powerful seabirds. We saw a lot of these guys, and this is a Sally Lightfoot crab. This is the strangest crab I think I've ever seen, with all the blues and oranges and reds and so forth. And so I asked our guide, I said, why is this name Sally Lightfoot? And he said, you know, in the 1800s, when we had a lot of sailors and stuff coming into this area, he said there was this dancer at a house of ill repute who would do these fan dances, these colorful feathered fans all around. And so the sailors who, attended these areas just decided that this crab looked like Sally Lightfoot. And so that's how it got its name. That's one area that you would probably like to research. Harry knows all this stuff. So here's others, a little variations of the different colors and whatever. Just they were everywhere. They were on the rocks. They were on the beach. They were all over the place. The only other crab that was fairly common was a ghost crab, and these guys would dig holes into the sand, and then they just take those two little eye stalks, and that's all you'd see. And they'd wait until the tide went out, and they could check whether the coast was clear and see scuttling out of the holes. This is a white-cheeked pintail. These are absolutely gorgeous birds. They're not just in the Galapagos, they're all in kind of Central and South America. This is an amazing bird. This is a Galapagos penguin. This is the only penguin that is in the tropics in the entire world.
And these guys were everywhere. We snorkeled in a couple areas, and they were snorkeling. They were kind of swimming all around, and they're just incredibly good swimmers. So they would either stand up on these rocks and just kind of sun themselves, or even just kind of do some sunbathing on lying down on their bellies. There was another bird that was also spectacular in my mind. We've all seen cormorants in various places, and they're common on the shore, and we actually see them sometimes in some of our rivers and lakes and so forth here in the Willamette Valley. But these are flightless cormorants, and if you look very carefully, it doesn't look like there's much of a wing there, because there isn't. And these guys cannot fly, but they can swim like you wouldn't believe. And they use those rudimentary wings as like paddles. And they go all around chasing fish and whatever. And the other thing that's interesting about these birds is they have a blue eye, just like our cormorants do. We also noticed, this is volcanic islands, something called a lava cactus, and these are cacti that grow in the little cracks between the rocks, and they get sand, and they develop some rudiments of soil and whatever, and they kind of get in there and develop and multiply. And so these were relatively common. They were like little islands all throughout the lava. We also saw Galapagos sea lions. They were very, very common. They would swim with us when we were snorkeling. Again, they would check you out. To a sea lion, you don't look like a person. You look like something with one big eye. You would ask, and they would look inside to see what's going on. Who are you? Why are you here? Swim with me. It's really kind of cool swimming with these guys. We did have shorebirds that were here and there, because some of the birds from North America do migrate down to the Galapagos and to South America as well. We found a water tattler, something that I've actually seen on the Oregon coast. So that was interesting. Roxy had some great pictures of sandpipers. It looked like I was an Yankee. Sandpiper. Lots of whales in the Galapagos, and so we saw some skeletons of some whales that had passed away. And as you can see, this is a black sand beach. And here's a whale skeleton with all the vertebrae. So remember, this is tropics, and whales go where in the summer? Where they go to the cold water, because that's where they eat. And where do they breed? Well, the answer is they breed in the tropics. And so we see them in the United States, down Baja and various areas going back and forth. Well, in South America, they're coming up from the Antarctic area, from Chile and so forth, and they're going north. And so there are lots of different whales in the area. I gotta tell you this great story. This is a smooth-billed Ani. He's about as big as a brewer's blackbird, so he's not very big. But we went to this interior area of one of the islands, and these guys were all over the bushes that were around this crater that we found. And so, I first saw him and I said, what kind of blackbird is that? My binoculars up and said, that's not a blackbird. And so there are rough-billed, smooth-billed greater Anis. I showed you some of those from our Amazon pictures. Anyways, I talked to our guide and say, hey, what's up with these guys? They're all over the place. He said, well, they're invasive. I said, really? He said, yeah, somebody brought them over from South America thinking that they would eat these bugs that they didn't eat. He said they were so bad when I was a kid that the government would pay you $5 to kill one of these and bring the body. Galapagos, Oh, so
obviously things have changed, but I think I like the bird. I don't know why. Here's another Galapagos mockingbird, and this was, Roxy got this photo as she was on the sand getting ready to photograph another bird, and this guy came right up, and you notice he's got that evil eye looking at her saying, okay, who are you? Why are you taking my picture? We had a lot of yellow warblers, but the warblers there are different. And so you can see this is a male yellow warbler, and what's the difference? Well, he's got this cinnamon colored cap. And that is synonymous with males in Galapagos, but this also happens in the Bahamas as well, probably some other areas, but that was very nice. So Roxy got some good pictures there. We crossed the equator 4 times, 5 times, and for those of you that have marine or maritime backgrounds, you know that's a big deal, you know, when you cross the equator. And if you've never crossed the equator, they have big ceremonies and all kinds of stuff for sailors that did that. So we're moving around, moving around one island from south of the equator, going north, and the crew got this big party up and stuff. So here we are going in and taking our picture saying, oh, we crossed the equator. So what they didn't do is the next day we crossed back over again and then crossed down again. And we didn't have a ceremony for that. So I think it was an excuse for them just to have some adult beverages. But these were very fun photos. Roxy and I were on the shore getting ready to get on the Zodiac probably in about 15, 20 minutes. And we saw these birds walking on the shore. And so we looked over and we said, they look like oyster catchers. And so sure enough, they were American oyster catchers. And when we focused our binoculars better, we noticed, oh my goodness, they've got a chick there. Well, a little bit later, this is when Roxy was on the sand getting all dirty, but getting a good photo. Another bird came up, and it was the male. And he was out at the wave areas, the tide was going out, and he was picking up tiny ghost crabs and bringing them up and then feeding the little baby and then going back and getting more. So, I mean, that was really cool. This guy probably is one of my favorite Galapagos birds. And for those of you that have studied or looked at the Galapagos, you know that this is kind of the poster child bird. Galapagos. It's the blue-footed booby, and they actually do have blue feet. And they're very interesting. We happen to be there at not the best time to see these guys because it was after their mating and courtship and all that kind of stuff. But they're known for a few things. The first is the way they fly and the way they fish. So they're sitting in the water like a duck or a gull or whatever, and then they decide they want to fly. So how do these birds do that? Well, they can't just jump up like the birds on the land do and then start flapping. So they have to run along the water with their webbed feet. And so this is a picture of this one booby running along, getting ready to get airborne. But what they do and what they're famous for is their courtship behavior. And they actually kind of go back and forth. They rock back and forth, and they go in and out and back and forth. And, you know, I was looking at these pictures, and these are not Roxy's pictures. We got those from Science Photo Library. But anyways, it shows them moving back and forth and doing this. And I looked at that and said, you know, that reminds me of when I was a kid and we did the hokey pokey. You might remember that, you know, where you put one foot in and the right foot in and the right foot out and so forth.
Doing the hokey pokey.
And do the hokey pokey. Well, I hadn't thought about that in a long time. But the thing that fascinated me the most about blue-footed boobies, although this is cool, is this. And that is the plunge diving. They would circle around looking in the water. And when they'd see a fish, they would go straight for the fish
they would elongate their entire body. So if you look at this picture, it's like an arrow. The bill, head, wings go completely to the back. They pull their feet in so that they get absolutely as aerodynamic as they can, and they just plunge into the water to get the fish. And they're very good at it, obviously. But I started thinking, how much force are you going to get when you take that plunge? And how fast are these birds going? And they're actually going about 30 to 40 miles an hour. So, my background, I'm a physician, and so I always think about, oh, well, can they get a concussion? Do they have get a cervical spine injury or anything like that? So I started looking this up, and I found this article, and you'll laugh when I tell you about this. It was in the proceedings of the National Academy of Science in the physics section, and some mechanical engineer went to the Galapagos, saw these birds. Gannets also do the same thing. And he decided, I want to figure this out. So believe it or not, he made plastic models of gannets with exactly, the specimens that he would do there. And he actually printed it on his 3D printer and then plunged these models into pools with electronic monitors and so forth to say what's going on here, how much force is doing this. And he found that the reason why this picture is perfect, it's 60 degrees because that is the perfect angle to get the best speed for diving. Okay. And he found that these birds were diving 30 to 40 miles an hour. But if you actually went back and looked at it, he found that once this bird's bill hit the water, it formed an air pocket around its head and neck. It's sort of like a cushion that protected the skull and the neck from the hard forces. And then, in fact, he postulated, and he had all these differential calculus formulas there that I don't know. I don't remember. I took calculus so long ago. It's ancient history. So anyways, I put the reference there for those of you engineers or mathematicians who want to look at the original work. But that's how they can do it. There's actually an air cushion around their head and neck that protects them from hurting themselves when they take these plunges, because they do this like over and over and over again in a day to, get their fish. Okay, so our summary of our bird scene, we only saw 35 species. There's not the number of species in the Galapagos like there is here in Oregon. I mean, I was just talking to Tim. We had an Illahee bird walk yesterday, and now we have seen over 100 species in the 3 years we've been doing monthly bird walks. There are not that many species there because there's not enough food and stuff to support them. But out of those, I saw 20 lifers, and as Harry said, loads and loads of endemics there that you will never see anywhere else, not just birds, but plants, lizards, fish, all kinds of stuff. So it's an absolutely amazing place, and it literally is one of a kind. So in summary, the Galapagos really is a unique place. It's located about 600 miles off of Ecuador. Lots and lots of nutrient waters coming in because of the combination of currents bringing it in. There are many unique species, as we talked about. The process of natural selection and adaptive radiation is continuing to go and percolate along even now. Charles Darwin developed the theory of evolution using his Galapagos observations on mostly finches and mockingbirds. There's absolutely awesome mammals, birds, fish, plants. It's just astonishing when you go and see these things. And the protection of these islands will require sustained vigilance from threats in the coming years. So thank you very much for your attention. I know we have went a lot of different places, but hopefully at least you got some kind of a sense as to what we did and the cool things we saw. Thank you. We do have the opportunity, we'll take some questions from the people in the audience. We do have the opportunity, since we're on Zoom, if somebody on Zoom wants to get a question, we have Tim that's monitoring the chat area. So if you go to your chat board and put a question up, we'll do our best to answer it for you. Okay, any questions? Yes. Yeah, it is hot.
Repeat the question.
Yeah, the question is, what about the weather? Is it hot, humid, and nasty? And actually, the answer is it's a deserty area. So yeah, it was in the probably 80s to 90s Fahrenheit. It was dry. We didn't have any rain, I don't believe. But again, it's right on the equator. The times are different. There are different things that are happening at different times. So is there a perfect time? And only, no, really, because you've got all the ocean things going back and forth. Yeah, there's, the springtime, which is associated with mating and, nesting and courting and all that kind of stuff, which is cool. But I mean, there are other things going on as well. Do the marine animals, the whales and stuff come at at a defined time? The answer is yes. In the summertime, they come and they reproduce there, and they take care of their calves and get them ready for traveling back to their home waters. So that's, some people do that. I mean, it really depends on what you're looking for. Yes. Yeah, question was, did you see any plastic pollution? The answer is no. We didn't see any. But having said that, remember that every single boat that goes onto the island has a naturalist. And so if they see stuff, they're picking it up or reporting it or whatever. So that's, you got monitors that come in the whole time. We didn't see any trash or anything in the water as well. So that was good. Were people a little bit kind of grouchy about some of the things they could not do? Yeah, just because they weren't used to it. I mean, he had a good understanding as to why they did it, and they were very, very good about educating people, the why, not just the what. Yeah. Oh, they're a small penguin. From the top of the question was the Galapagos penguin. How big are they? They're probably about 2 feet tall. So they're small. They look small to medium. Yeah, they're not like, emperors or king penguins or anything. They're pretty small. There's only one, I think, that I remember, and that's the fairy penguins we saw in South Africa. And they're real small. They're only about this tall. So these guys probably about 2 feet, I would imagine. Yes.
Regarding adaptive radiation, have any recommendations on particular books?
Yeah. I had put some references at the end here. I'll give them to you and can share them with you at the end.
Okay.
But if you just go Google adaptive radiation, you'll get a whole bunch of things back. This guy Schluter is probably one of the most well-known guys, but I mean, there's just loads and loads of stuff. It's amazing what they're finding. And not only that, everyone is, Harry mentioned the fact that that Darwin stuff created a whole bunch of consternation with politics, religion, all these things, and there are the people that don't believe in evolution, whatever, does this affect us today? The answer is, heck yeah. What do you mean? Well, did you get your COVID shot? Why did you get a COVID shot? Because there was a variation, right? Why is there variation? Because the virus is mutating so that it can be better at staying alive. And there's evolution for us on a day-to-day basis. I mean, as a physician, I spent all my time culturing infections of various parts of the body and making sure that the antibiotics that I gave was going to kill the bugs that were making people sick. And did the bugs mutate and get resistant to various antibiotics? The answer is yes. So it's a natural process. Yes, sir.
What are the current trends on the population of the endemic and other going down?
Yeah, the question is, what are the major pressures for all of the animals and flora and fauna of the Galapagos based on some of the threats that are going on? My answer is it depends on the species. There's an invasion of something called a vampire fly, and this is attacking birds and killing off a lot of birds. And so now they're working on programs to eradicate that. That was brought in from Asia. I forget exactly where they're from. So they do that. There's a Darwin Institute that does nothing but study, well, not nothing, but part of their big mission is to look at these type of invasives and so forth and develop strategies, but they're doing it very smart. So they have actually an area where they'll study proposed solutions to these invasives. Like they actually studied the vampire fly. They had a complete closed lab and they introduced a couple of different solutions, be it pesticides or biologics or using genetic changes so that the next generation of the flies would be sterile and blah blah blah. And they closed all those off for 2 years before they would come back and give an answer to say, this is what I think we should do. So they're very intentional about the whole process. It's not like, I think this might work, so let's just give it a try, because we have found that the unanticipated consequences of some of these bright ideas are catastrophic for some of the animals and systems that we've seen in the past. Oh, I wanted to mention one thing that I found in my research. Giant tortoises, they were actually endangered at one point in time. And what I found was the reason why they were endangered is these sailors would come to these islands and they would say, I need food, I need water, I need all these things. How can I get things for my ship so that if I continue for months or whatever at sea, I will be able to feed the sailors and so forth. And what they found was these Galapagos tortoises, they could go without water for 6 to 12 months at a time. And they would just go and take loads of these and put them in their ships, and they were meat source, and they didn't take any water or anything. And so they were actually something that they would capture so that they could feed the sailors. And obviously now they don't do that anymore. But that's amazing. Yes, Kathy. Yeah. How are the times arranged on the ship in order to go and say you have only this time to this time? It's like a choreograph. There's a central area and you get permissions and permits to go and that you're assigned those times. Yeah. They do it by time and they do it by number. So they could say, okay, you could take 20 people to this one beach. You have to leave by such and such and so and so. And then they rotate all the way around. It's to the point where the people who do all those tours, they have like a regular schedule that they go, you know, and I said, well, you know, that's kind of, you know, it kind of makes you a little bit tight in terms of, wow, you can only go here and you can only go there. But they have learned to do that. And the good news is the naturalists, when they do there, if you visit a place more than one time, they find cool places where this animal or this bird or this plant is. And so they take people to all the cool areas, and you don't have to, you know, bushwhack and explore like we do from just going to an area we've never birded, for example. But you get a guide and they can say, oh yeah, I know where this hummingbird nest is, and they'll take you right to it. Some can. That depends on the where you are. Okay, so for example, we had 68 people and 48. So we had, I think, 4 different zodiacs. Okay, and so we went to different places and we did rotate a little bit ourselves. But and they made sure, you know, it was not overcrowded, and you've been there, so you know. Yes, ma'am.
It did not feel large, it felt small. And there were times when we were on an island and there were 2 or 3 directions people went off in. With your naturalist, you went with a naturalist. One went this way, one went this way, one went this way. We crisscrossed along the way. Everybody got to see everything. And then we go back to the boat.
Yeah, so the questions were, how do they arrange people when they get on the shore and do all the things they need to do? And the answer is a lot of times you have subgroups. You get a ship and you have 3 or 4 zodiacs that went in, and one group A went over this side, group B went to the other side, group C went the third side, and then they switch. Actually, it worked out pretty well, and I was very surprised. But I'm not sure how much they had to pay for those permits to get there. My sense is probably it was pretty expensive. But you know, it's the cost of doing business, I guess, to keep. And I'm sure that all that money went for, you know, running the parks and taking care of all the support stuff and all of the rangers. And you know, there were people in boats that were checking to make sure you were fishing or doing whatever. So they were policing it pretty well. Any chat questions, Tim?
No, just a bunch of thank yous.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Industrial fishing, still have the oceans of the world. I was wondering, when you have lobsters going in, you have the cold water, there's a lot of nutrients, are there problems with, part of the industrial fishing coming in? And so, Ecuador maybe or anybody else help? Or do they?
Yeah, the question is, how about all these fishing people that come in? Can they be monitored or whatever when they're trying to fish these places and potentially, you know, deplete the fish in the area? Actually, the area around the Galapagos, as I said, was a marine preserve, and they actually have like rangers out in boats, and you cannot fish in those areas unless you have a permit. Now it's just like hunting here. Okay, you have to have your hunting license, and you can only hunt on, you know, designated times and designated places, etc. But you're not going to be with a game warden every step of the way. So, you know, they make their rounds around and they check and do things. But right now, the exclusion of these big commercial fishing areas has been successful because they've monitored
boundaries of this marine preserve to keep folks out, and they're continuing to monitor the populations of all of the species of fish to make sure that they're reproducing and doing the things that they're supposed to do to maintain the population. So far, so good. There's still lots of concerns about pollution, about climate change, about all those things that are affecting everybody. But so far, it appears to be working. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it.